the binary.
I am non-binary.
Non-binary or gender fluid.
I am proud to be non-binary.
What is the gender binary, and how does it affect the world in which we live?
The first question has a rather simple answer. The word gender typically refers to an internalized sense of feeling masculine, feminine, or any mix of the sort. The word binary means a combination of two things. Put them together and you get this concept of a one or the other gender identity. The next question is a bit harder to answer, and to address this issue, we must first take a look at how the idea of a strict male or female only gender binary came to exist in the Americas. In many modern cultures, the negative effects of early colonization from Western European countries pertaining to the acceptance of different genders is still extremely prevalent. Historically, in many indigenous cultures in the United States as well as Mexico, there are documented cases of the existence and acceptance of what we classify today as a transgender man or woman. Most of these native races and cultures accepted and sometimes praised the existence of a third gender, usually classified as someone who is both man and woman. In front of you now is a map with a marking in every area where a third gender was recognized by a culture or race. As you can see from viewing the map, most of the blue markings are where we see many cultures with a long and rich history. It is also evident by the map that there are more documentations of third genders and third gender acceptances in the Americas versus in Western European countries. Some examples of cultures that include third genders are Two Spirits of Native American tribes, Mushe of the Zapotec people from Oaxaca Peninsula, as well as Mahu in Hawaii. In comparison, the Western European countries have very few to no markings at all. In relation to the previous statement, when the European countries such as England and Spain were sending colonists to conquer the New World, they brought with them the ideals of their country's religion. During the 1600s, when England was colonizing what is now the United States, Christianity and Puritanism was widely practiced. It is not news that Christianity commonly does not agree with the accepted existence of the LGBT+ community in modern times, and it was still the same in this time period as well. When English colonists first came into contact with tribes that accepted and revered transgendered men and women, they were shocked and disturbed by the general acceptance of these people. In fact, in 1594, Spanish conquistador Vasco Nuez de Balboa set his army and his dogs upon the Native Americans for expressing their gender in ways that differed from the common acceptance of gender back in the European countries. This is one of the first documented cases of persecution of a third gender in the Americas. They also had very different ideas as to what classifies someone as a man or a woman. For example, in native tribes, the women would perform tasks that were traditionally seen as man's work in Europe, such as gathering firewood, hunting, fishing, and tending the fire through the night. In an article titled Not But Women by Sandra Slater, she states that understanding gendered dynamics of native masculinities helps to illuminate their direct contradictions to European ideals and shows how these collisions of identities may have impacted the impetus for Europeans to Christianize through conquest. The Christian ideals of European society influenced their views of what men and women should and should not be, as well as the idea that being a two-spirited man or woman was an abomination in the eyes of their God. Deuteronomy 22:5 states, "A woman must not wear man's clothing, nor is a man to put on a woman's clothing, for all that do are abominations to the Lord your God." This verse has been widely seen as speaking about the transgender community and serves as a good example of how the Christian colonists of that time viewed transgendered men and women. In addition, the prevalent practice of Catholicism in Spain from its beginning to modern times also has a major impact on the indigenous races and cultures. Catholics have a similar opinion about the LGBT+ community as Christians do. Spain and England both tried to convert the native peoples to their respective religion, one that severely contradicts the thoughts and beliefs of the natives. Nevertheless, they succeeded in forcing their European culture onto the indigenous peoples of America and Mexico, and we still see the effects of this colonization to this day. Because of the Christian and Catholic backgrounds of England and Spain, America and Mexico now have a different common opinion about transgender men and women and the LGBT+ community in general. The strict gender binaries that are seen in modern American and Mexican cultures today were put in place by the conquistadors and colonists that came and spread their religion that does not accept trans men and women.
As previously mentioned, 3 examples of third genders in cultures that do not follow a strict gender binary are the Muxe of Mexico, the Two-Spirit people of Native American tribes, and the Mahu in Hawaii. All 3 of these cultures and racial groups accept the idea of gender variances that do not follow the strict 2-category male or female boxes that the European gender binary introduced to the New World during colonization. To truly gain a well-rounded view of non-binary or variant genders that are present in North America, both historical times and present day, it is important to take a look at multiple examples from different cultural groups. One such example comes from the country of Mexico, where a group of gender-variant people called the Muxe live. The Muxe of Mexico come from the southern state of Oaxaca, where the population descends from the pre-Columbian civilization known as Zapotec. Documentation of their civilization goes back over 2,500 years, and the history of the Muxe is interwoven into the civilization from the very start. According to an article from the New York Times called A Lifestyle Distinct, the Muxe of Mexico, anthropologists have traced the Muxe roots and acceptance of gender variations to the presence of cross-dressing Aztec priests and Mayan gods who were both male and female at the same time. This acceptance of the Muxe was widespread across the area until the Spanish came during colonization and successfully managed to wipe out the majority of gender variation acceptance using Christianity. Now, in 2017, the Muxe of Mexico are entering back into the spotlight as the gender binary enforced by Western European colonization has begun to fall away from the norm. Acceptance of gender variation is not yet widespread across North America, but with the presence of the Muxe and their unapologetic gender expressions, acceptance is on the horizon. Another example of a culture that accepts the presence of gender-variant individuals is from the vast span of the United States and Canada. Gender variations are commonplace in the many different Native American groups and have been an accepted way of life dating back to life prior to colonization. In fact, according to Indian County Media Network, a site dedicated to serving the nations and celebrating the people, the presence of gender-variant individuals was a celebrated concept until the first settlers came to the Americas. At the point of contact, all Native American societies acknowledged 3 to 5 genders: male, female, two-spirit female, two-spirit male, and transgender. To clarify the difference between the terms transgender and two-spirit, transgender refers to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their birth sex, while a two-spirit person embodies both femininity and masculinity and does not identify as part of the male or female binary set by Western Europe. The term two-spirit was coined in 1989 to unify the idea of gender variation and to give a common term among different Native American nations, all of whom have their own languages and wording to express the idea of gender variation. Although gender variations have always been an accepted part of life in Native American culture, the individuals who live two-spirited lives often face controversy and conflict when faced with the gender binary that many Caucasian Americans attempt to uphold. The gender binary has set a toxic atmosphere for two-spirit individuals to exist in, and this is especially harmful to two-spirited teens. One such teen was Fred Martinez, a Navajo 16-year-old from Colorado. Fred was, in many ways, just like any other teen. He had a group of friends and enjoyed playing games and cards with them on the weekends. On June 16, 2001, Fred and his group of friends headed out to the local carnival to hang out and enjoy each other's company. Fred never came home. His body was found days later lying in a ditch in an empty span of desert. Fred was murdered because he lived openly as a gay, two-spirited teen. This hate crime is just one example of evidence that the European concept of a gender binary is toxic to the lives of the people who do not fit into the careful boxes of male or female. Although the murder of Fred Martinez was meant to send a message to two-spirited individuals that they need to force themselves into the boxes, his death did the exact opposite. In the decades since Fred's passing, the Native American community has banded together to support and protect members of their nations that live as two-spirited. Colorado now has an organization to help two-spirited members of the community called Colorado's Two-Spirit Society. The conference's organizer, Arlene Milich, understands that Fred Martinez's death did not have to be in vain. She says, "It's really sad that we have to use death to get the point. We shouldn't ever have to do that, but I think that we use the death as means of helping people understand." The gender binary has harmed the lives of innocent individuals, but as the community bands together, the gender binary continues to decay. The final example of a community that supports gender variations is the Native Hawaiian culture, home to a gender-variant group of people called the Mahu. According to the documentary by PBS called A Place in the Middle, a Mahu is an individual that straddles somewhere in the middle of the male and female binary. Historically, Mahu were seen as wise and were treated with great respect. This tradition is coming back as Hawaiians as a whole take steps to revive traditions and preserve the culture. This documentary follows the life of Kumohina, a teacher at a private school in Hawaii where the goal of the education is to interweave standard learning with preserving Native Hawaiian culture. A large part of the Native culture that is important to Kumohina is the tradition of the Mahu, seeing as she identifies as such. The Mahu tradition is another example of a part of a culture that was targeted for removal during colonization. Similarly to the Mushe and the Two Spirits, the Mahu are also making a comeback. By teaching Native Hawaiian culture, history, and traditions in schools in Hawaii, acceptance of Mahu has undergone massive growth in the past decade. While the lives of Mahu are far from easy, the increasingly accepting views of fellow islanders has helped to create a safer environment for Mahu. Humans dislike having in-betweens. They would rather put everything into tidy little boxes with labels so that everything makes sense. But as shown with the idea of a gender binary, shoving people into tidy little categories simply does not work.
The way gender is presented varies extremely from community to community across America, but while some try and rise above, many are still victims to intense stereotypes that try and dictate how they should choose to present themselves. These ideas of hypermasculinity, hypofemininity, and hypersexualization all bring about stress that changes how minorities represent their gender, and how white America views them. People in the Black and Asian communities in America find it hard to live above these stereotypes, and in order to learn about how it affects them, we must first look at what these harmful stereotypes are. Masculinity is a psychological term that defines the exaggeration of stereotypical male behavior, such as an emphasis on physical strength, aggression, and sexuality. This stereotype of how a man is supposed to act is particularly harmful to people of color, who, according to futurity, may feel the need to act out in violent or harmful ways in order to find value away from their assigned group. This idea of hypermasculinity being pushed onto young black men is thoroughly discussed in the documentary Beyond Beats and Rhymes, directed by Byron Hurt, in which he examines the toxicity of hip-hop and the culture around it. It focuses on how rap and hip-hop focus on and seem to condone this idea of hypermasculinity, and how the whole facade of hip-hop is a prison, even to the people who listen to it. Every black man that goes in the studio, he's always got two people in his head. Him in the terms of who he really is, and the thug that he feels he has to project. It's a prison for us. It's a prison that we're in. This idea is also how it traps young black men into this very stereotypical idea of what a man should be like. The director says that when he was a star quarterback and ladies' man in high school, that rap's music, lyrics, and images fell right into line with my masculine identity, and that he listened and partied to a whole lot of hip-hop without really questioning the lyrics he was listening to. This is what many young black men get sucked into, this ideal version of a man that is a truly very dangerous representation of men. But when young black men are stereotyped as brutish and violent, they find solace in trying to push themselves away from their counterparts and then dig themselves deeper into the hypermasculine idea of what a man should be. And this is incredibly harmful, especially to how black men develop in society and with their gender identity. Masculinity also harms another minority group of men, and that is Asian American men. A study aptly titled, "Being an Asian American Male is Really Hard Actually," is a cultural study done into the psychology of Asian Americans' masculinity and their overall well-being. It goes in depth discussing how, historically, Asian American men are constantly emasculated and seen as less manly because they are stereotyped as valuing success and financial stability over personal relationships and sexuality. Many of you may be saying, wait, those aren't awful stereotypes, why are they so oppressed? Well, what these stereotypes fail to bring to light is the fact that historically, these stereotypes ignore the fact that Asian men have been pushed into mainly women's work because they were seen as less than and compared to their Caucasian counterparts. This women's work became a part of the stereotype of the Asian American male because of work they were forced to do throughout various economic collapses. And because of these stereotypes, we have the less masculine stereotype of the Asian American man today. Now, many Asian American men today find themselves trying to fulfill both the stereotype of masculinity and also embody the men they grew up with who are hardworking. This has caused a strange interpretation of what these men see their gender as they are constantly battling external stereotypes and internalized ones as well. The group that constantly battles stereotypes is the Asian American woman. Now, many of you may say again that these stereotypes can't be that harmful, and that's again where you're wrong. The essay White Sexual Imperialism, a Theory of Asian Feminist Jurisprudence, goes into detail describing a theory titled White Sexual Imperialism. This theory states that through the rape and war that come along with conquering, it gave way to the hypersexualized stereotypes of the Asian woman. This stereotype then gave us the overprevalence of Asian women in pornography, the mail-order bride phenomenon, Asian fetishism, and worst of all, the abundance of sexual and domestic violence against Asian American women. Because of these awful stereotypes, Asian American women are less likely to report sexual and domestic assault when it does occur. And all of these things have effects on how they view themselves as women. Many of them struggle to find a balance in between how they view themselves and how society wants them to be. And this society has been built into their very lives, where even their parents reinforce the ideal of a good, quiet housewife who submits to her husband and family's every whim and desire. Many younger Asian American women are finding themselves further and further away from this stereotype, building themselves up to be the strong leaders and women they know they are, but it goes without saying that many find themselves seemingly stuck in the harmful stereotypes of their pasts. And finally, the last group we will discuss is the African American woman. The stereotypes that surround this group go all the way back to slavery, and how things that occurred then built up the stereotypes we see today. In the essay, Theorizing Black Femininity, Lauren Fannin brings up the point that due to the enslavement of Africans, black masculinity and femininity existed in a very constrained environment, and neither gender was able to fully participate in the prescribed systems of patriarchy and ideal womanhood. She also goes in depth into how Caucasian females' features were praised for their beauty, which leads many African American women to try and fulfill these stereotypes of beauty while also feeling worse about themselves. Many other stereotypes, such as the mammy and the Jezebel, are still continually harmful to African American women of today, and it paints them as happy to serve and also hypersexual, which seems to be a trend among stereotyping minority women. Black women strive to live above these stereotypes, regardless of how others view them, and celebrate what it truly means to be a black woman in America.
The gender binary and gender stereotypes are harmful to Native cultures and minority groups in the Americas. The Western European concept of a gender binary simply does not accurately portray the world in which we live. It is shown through the long and rich histories of Native cultures that gender variances have been around for hundreds of years and are a completely normal part of life. The settlers from Western European nations attempted to wipe out the acceptance of gender variances such as the Mushe, Two Spirits, and the Mahu but through the preservation of Native history and culture, the acceptance has been steadily growing. The ideas of hypermasculinity, hypofemininity, and hypersexuality are harmful to the African American and Asian American groups in the United States. All of the gender stereotypes that construct these sort of specific gender roles for different cultural and racial groups are very harmful and create a toxic environment to exist in. In short, the gender stereotypes that make up the gender binary enforced by the ideals of Western European countries do not accurately depict the world around us and should not be accepted as the right way to live. Living your life in the way that makes you feel the most comfortable in your skin is the best gift you can ever give to yourself.